Hi again for one of our behind the scenes tours. You are getting to learn all sorts of information that is just not readily available. I mean, you have to talk to the people behind the scenes who can give us all sorts of insights, and we're going to do that again here. We're actually right now on the first deck of the Ark, and people walk into the first deck. Now, the second deck and the third deck have a lot more exhibits, although the first deck has quite a lot of sculpted animals and cages,
still a lot of
and
cool stuff.
other things, and it's sort of an introduction to everything. And then you get up to the second deck, and wow, then the third deck, and you could spend days here actually.
Yeah.
And here on the first deck, I have with me Travis, lead production designer. Actually, Travis is one of the talented people God brought to the ministry a number of years ago. And there's a team of you people that actually work on all of this, and it's amazing the talents the Lord has given you, and use it for His honor and for His glory, and that's why you're here.
We got an awesome team.
So it is an awesome team. So we just show people this. We're going to show them this Ark model that took millions of years to build, right?
It felt like it.
And it is unique in the world. There is no other model like it in the world.
Yeah.
And it's right here showcased on the first deck, so we're going to show you that here. But leading up to that, we have all sorts of signage here as well. You know, how large was the Ark, and it talks about which cubit we used, because there's actually different length cubits, and why we used a particular cubit. And you're involved in all that research too, weren't you, Travis?
Yeah, I mean, we had to, read a lot of what kind of we're saying about a lot of those things, and
And then how we came up with the 510-foot long Ark that we have.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff was like developed by like Tim Lovett and
Tim Lovett in Australia.
Yeah,
he's an engineer that did a lot of this research.
yeah, brilliant guy.
And he came over here and helped us for quite a while.
Yeah,
And then all about cubits. What is a cubit? How long is a cubit? And actually, you can buy the cubit we used in our gift store.
Yep.
How about that?
Yeah.
And people love that.
So Ken, how does your cubit compare there?
How's my cubit compare there? Okay,
Yeah.
let me see. It's a bit longer.
Little short.
Oh, you know what? And I got my injured figure. That's a reminder that sin has affected the world.
That's right.
And so, yeah, if I do that there, you can see.
We've got a guy in our shop that he's, I think, 6'2", and his cubit lines up exactly. So, just to give you guys a sense of how big of a person.
And
would
this is
need
an
to be.
interesting one because the shape of our Ark. very iconic.
Yeah.
With the fin on the bow.
Yeah.
And there's reasons for that when you look at ancient ships and
Yeah.
the way in which it turns it into the wind and so on.
Yeah.
And then the stern and, you know, having it so it doesn't have a, if it was flat at the front or the back, the waves could cause massive problems and
Tumble
all the
it
rest
and
of it.
all that.
And, you know, some of the older diagrams about the ark were sort of like a rectangular box shape.
Yeah.
Well, when we produced this shape, there were some people that thought we'd almost, I don't know, that we'd gone against the Bible or something.
Right.
But the Bible doesn't tell us exactly the
Right.
shape. It just says the general dimensions. And so we can use some artistic license, engineering license.
Yeah.
And actually, a lot of it was worked out by research on ancient ships.
Yeah.
And Tim Lovett did a lot of that as well.
Yeah.
And came up with a lot of these ideas. And
Yeah.
I love it. It's iconic.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so there's no other arc
Yeah.
shape like this in the world.
The way I look at it is like we're being true to the Bible, but we're creating a plausible scenario for what it
Right.
could have looked like.
And we do that in a number of the exhibits in
Yeah.
other areas, you know, true to the Bible, but create some plausible,
Yeah.
you know, situations that might have
Exactly.
occurred and so on. So let's go over to this
Yeah.
famous ark model,
Yeah,
unique in the
this
world,
beauty.
nothing like
Yeah.
like it anywhere in the world. There's
Yeah.
only one of a kind. It's
Right.
right here.
Yeah.
And
So, one of the-
Travis, I'll just say a couple
Yeah.
of things and get you to explain it all.
Cool.
The cages that are in here are exactly the same and to scale with the cages that are used on the
Yeah.
first deck and the second deck.
Yeah.
And so all of the items you see in here, you will see
The full scale versions.
full scale versions of them on the first deck and the second
Yeah.
deck.
Particularly the second has a lot more, but
The
yeah.
second does have a lot more. And then the idea is how Noah could fit all the animals in here.
Yeah.
And of course, we have this ark open for tourists,
Right,
right? For
right.
people to come as a teaching centre. a
Yeah. So
teaching
how many people
attraction.
did you say we can fit in here?
Well, we're licensed to fit, you know, permitted to fit up to 10,000,
Yeah.
but we're not going to do that, not at one time. But
Yeah.
we are. We can actually exit 10,000 at one time.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us, first of all, how long did this model take
Well,
to build?
so this model took it was, I mean, it's hard, all these projects are so hard because we had so many projects going on all at once. But I would say it took about a few people, maybe about 6 months to a year, somewhere in that range. I think I have it written down somewhere, but it's.
I know there was 6
somewhere
months of extensive work, but it
Yeah.
took a lot of lead up to
Yeah,
it too.
definitely.
So
And
probably,
one of the
took a
cool-
whole year for the whole thing
Yeah.
ultimately.
Yeah. One of the cool things, you know, you were just mentioning about fitting all of the animals. I remember, so we worked early on with our research team that, you know, what we had to start with was figuring out how many animals that we're dealing with, because that's really the heart of the issue.
And
You know.
over here is a summary of the
Exactly,
research.
yeah.
So we had a number of researchers working on
Yeah.
this for quite a few years,
Yeah.
going through and looking at the kinds of land animals. And of course,
Yeah.
they looked at, like, for instance, dogs.
Right.
And you can document that they can all interbreed in some way or another, so they're all
Exactly.
connected, so there's only one dog kind, right?
Yeah.
So they did that sort of research, and the number they came up with is actually, we would say, overestimating.
Right. It is a worst case scenario.
Worst
so
case
it
scenario.
could even be a lot less than this.
In fact,
But,
some of them I was talking to said they think it could be less than 1,000 actual kinds.
Really. Really.
But that's overestimating. And, you know, when it comes to fossil representatives, they don't breed, they're dead.
Yeah.
So,
It makes it a little more challenging.
so you
but-
can't document whether
Yeah.
they're the same kind when we think some of them were, and so it goes on. Or
Yeah.
bats,
Yeah.
lots of different species of bats. Have
The
never,
bats is a good example. And we
Yeah.
have an exhibit down here that we show, you know, there might have been 1, 2, 3 kinds, who knows? But we show, I think it's like 15 or more kinds of
Right.
bats, just to be safe.
because we've never documented
Right.
them interbreeding.
Exactly.
In fact, it could even be there's just one kind of bat.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. I don't know a whole lot of bat breeders.
So that's why this number is overestimated here. But even using this number that we know is worst case scenario, you
Yeah.
can still fit all the
Right.
land animals.
And that
the
was what
representative
was
kinds in
really
the ark.
neat. So you can see with these layouts here, we spent a lot of time, you know, myself, one of our kind of researchers, he actually used to work with animals, and so he's very familiar with the caretaking of, you know, what it takes to take care of, you know, multiple animals. Even my wife worked with animals for many years, but we went through and we laid out all of these animals based on trying to make sense of how are 8 people going to take care of almost 7,000, animals on the ark? It's a big deal. I mean, you figure that's almost like saying every one of you gets to take care of 800 animals every day, And so to try and create a system in which it makes sense, that is feasible, that these people could automate certain things every day and be able to take care of these guys. And I got the chills when we laid them all out based on their space needs, and they all fit. It was a really neat feeling to have, and just
that was
go,
a great
wow.
exercise.
Yeah.
And then here, on the second deck,
Yeah.
as well as an exhibit on kinds and how, to determine a kind.
Yeah.
It's translated from the Hebrew word mean in Genesis, and it's not a species. In most instances, it's at the family level of classification. But there's another exhibit on the second deck that shows how the whole system would work in circulating air and providing water and food and
goes into
so
a lot
on.
more details.
And so there's been a lot of calculations done in regard to this, worst case scenario here of these animals and how much you would need of various things and how many cages. So there's a lot of research. They just didn't pull these numbers out of the hat.
We had to do calculations on how much water could possibly be collected from the roof if necessary, how much water would they need to bring on board. So you'll see on this layout, the vast majority of all the storage that you would end up seeing on the ark would be food and water. Just trying to say, hey, they need to take water on with them, they need to take food. I mean, that's really the bulk of it. And it really does fit, and that's the really incredible thing. It works, with a worst case scenario, it all works.
And they didn't have to go and find the animals. God actually sent the animals. There's a supernatural aspect you can't deny there. God sent the animals to go on the ark, and he would have selected the ones he wanted, I believe, with the greatest genetic potential. Also, it says all flesh had become violent before the flood. Now, originally, man and the animals were all vegetarian. And after the flood, in Genesis 9:3, then Noah's told that now they can eat anything. Just as I gave you the plants, now you can eat all things. So those who obeyed God's word would not have been eating any animal flesh until after the flood.
Right.
But I suspect that the animals that God brought on the ark were necessarily the ones that were the most violent or anything like that.
Yeah.
And probably mainly, they would have brought all sorts of vegetables and fruits and plant matter and so on for the animals to eat. In fact, even animals today, like bears that you tend to think of, or they eat fish and so on, they primarily exist on fruit and plants and that sort of thing. So this is an incredible model.
Yeah, and so like these cage layouts here are not arbitrary. There's nothing random about it. These are all capturing basically what we laid out. So you'll have, like in these big ones, just as an example, these are all where we would put the clean animals, and you can put them in groups of 14 all together. So you'd have a whole bunch of, say, goat sheeps in here, you'd have the giraffe kind up in here. And so some of these you'd have some of your big flying creatures down here. And then the other thing to take into consideration is just the low levels of light. By the time it gets here, it's pretty dark. And so what we have down here are some of the reptiles that you can potentially kind of coax into a state of hibernation, so it's a little less maintenance. So we had to take all those things into account.
So there's a lot of thought going into it.
yeah.
And when they do walk up, this is at the end of deck 1, when they do walk up to the next deck, to deck 2, you see these walkways above the cages, and you see how they could put water and food in there to feed those animals. You'll see that's done exactly that way up there on the second deck, and you'll actually see models of some of Noah's family doing that. So again, I encourage people, take your time and
Take your time. Just
look up.
Get your flashlight out on your phone and just look into this cage, because it's easy to walk by it, but there is a lot of stuff in here. You can really peer back into all of our little storage bays and where they're storing the food.
Yeah, you can miss that if you don't sort of kneel down a little and look in there. And then when you go up to the second deck, you'll see we built it the same way.
Yeah, and we actually built it in a 3D model too, so we could really be sure that everything's working. One of the cool things is we started getting into VR. So it was cool to put on the VR headset and walk through this model and really see how tight it feels and how.
Hey,
close
we've got a
everything is.
VR exhibit coming.
That's right.
In fact, it's an outside company that's doing this,
Mm-hmm.
and they're building a VR exhibit here that'll be the quality of what you'd get
Yeah.
at Universal Studios, Disney,
Yeah,
places
this
like
sounds
that.
really exciting.
It's going to be absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And as we sort of walk past this arc model here, there's some more signage here about how the hull was built,
Yeah.
the building of the hull, again, based on a lot of ancient technology and an engineer looking at that. And then the ark's lumber, because people often ask me, did we use gopher wood? And I say, yes, we had to go for a lot of wood. So it tells us what...
I think that might be one of the oldest jokes.
Yeah, yeah. It tells us the sort of wood that we used here. For instance, we use Douglas fir, we use Engelmann spruce, we use some other wood as well. There's bamboo decking, bamboo and white fir actually. So this gives you that sort of information. People like that information. Mm-hmm. And then over here, so the difference between Noah's Ark and Ark Encounter. I sometimes have people say to me, now, will your Ark float? And I say, no, it's got 3 big holes in the back because we've got it anchored to 3 towers and people go in there for the restrooms and the exit stairs are in there.
Yeah.
So this was sort of designed as a ship, but built for tourists.
Right.
Built for people to go through.
And then bringing it back to dioramas, one of the cool things that you get to do with dioramas and illustrations is you get to show it exactly how you would want
like
it.
the one we just looked at there.
So.
And then this is an interesting one too. How long did it take Noah to build the ark? Because a lot of people think, 120 years. Mm-hmm. Well, no, you've got to read the Bible very carefully because it says, and their days will be 120 years. It's more likely that we're saying in 120 years the flood will come. There'll be a judgment. When God told Noah to build the ark, he said it would be for Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their sons' wives. So it seems God did not tell Noah about the flood until Noah's sons were already grown up and married.
Yeah.
And assuming a minimum of 25 years from Noah's 500th year to allow for his sons to be born, mature and marry, then Noah would have had a maximum of 75 years to build the ark.
Yeah.
So that's at the most. I think it could have been a lot less. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you hire people, as we hired a lot of contractors, maybe Noah could have hired people. Mm-hmm. Not only that, actually, if you're very talented, you can do a lot of building in a short period of time.
I wish I had 75 years to work on one project.
Well, yeah, and you need to read the scripture where it tells you, the age of, for instance, Shem when he came off the ark and so on. You realise it couldn't have been 120 years.
Yeah.
And so 75 years maximum, maybe a lot less.
Yeah.
And, who knows how many years that God was patient. Mm-hmm. It says, he's long-suffering.
Yeah.
And so maybe he had Noah take a long time, quite a serious time, number of years, tens of years, maybe 30 years, 40 years, 50, maybe 75, as a warning to the world. Mm-hmm. But think of all the scoffing that must have occurred during that time. Yeah. And Noah remained faithful. Mm-hmm. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
When you think about that?
Yeah.
Hey, before we finish, how about we show people something here? Yeah. A reminder as you're walking through the ark, don't forget to look up on occasions. For instance, if you come over here, we actually have a sign that says, look up. And if you actually look up right here, you will be able to see right up to the roof deck. We actually have a roof deck that is not open to the public yet. One day we'd like to develop that. But you go right
really
up here. And you see these big lodge poles. I believe these are Douglas fir, down the other end, the Engelmann spruce. And I think the Engelmann spruce is a few hundred years old. And they were harvested from forests where there were dead